Dwayne ducked away from the window as the police cruiser drove past. The houses in this neighborhood had been abandoned for years, and the periodic police patrols were important in keeping a lid on violence and unrest among the neighborhood's more dangerous elements. As fuel prices had risen, however, the police had cut back on their patrols, resulting in a tacit live and let live agreement with the families that had found shelter there. Dwayne's family had first come to the abandoned neighborhood after a townhouse developer had bulldozed their apartment building in the city. When Dwayne heard about the empty houses in the suburbs, he and mother and sister hitched a ride out. But even with a roof over their heads, they still had to eat. Food prices had risen sky high, and after a series of budget cuts, the government was little help. But the hard times didn't surprise Dwayne. What surprised him was that so many white families were in the same boat. He thought to himself, you'd think that now that it's white people who are out of work, the government would do something about it. But the government seemed unwilling to help families like Dwayne's, which just kept struggling to survive. While the economy had improved in the early 2010s, it soon entered a double-dip recession. Manufacturing and retailing fell dramatically. Government revenues decreased. Bankruptcies and foreclosures decimated a middle class that for years had been living one paycheck away from economic catastrophe. Unemployment between 10 and 15% became increasingly structural as global competition, outsourcing, automation, and government downsizing reduced the supply of jobs. Worse was yet to come. In 2016, the price of oil surged to over $200 a barrel and never came back down. Global oil production had peaked, and slowing its decline required an all-out drilling effort offshore, in the deep seabed, and in the Arctic. With growing demand in China, India, and other fast-developing countries, prices would continue to rise, at least until cheaper sources could be brought to scale. Higher fuel prices had little impact on the rich, but low-income households ended up paying more than 50% of their income for energy. Many were unable to heat their homes. Others could no longer commute to jobs located far from their homes. Rising fuel costs also translated into higher food prices. By the mid-2020s, low-income families were using another 20% of their income just to keep food on the table. The struggle for jobs and resources intensified distinctions based on class, generation, race, and ethnicity. The well-to-do fought to protect their interests and keep their taxes down. Baby boomers tried to cling to all their benefits at the expense of younger generations. Millennials seethed with frustration as baby boomers remained in the workforce. Tensions between African Americans and Hispanics rose sharply, and immigrant communities suffered as so-called papers, please laws required them to prove legal status before they could obtain health care, emergency services, and school for their children. While the middle class shrank and the ranks of the vulnerable expanded, the good life was still available for the ultra-rich. These people enjoyed expensive premium lanes on public highways, an Alzheimer's treatment that cost $160,000 per year, and reliable 6G data plans for their mobile devices. These glaring inequities sparked unrest, violence, and even large-scale riots from time to time. Leaders often used these events to justify urban renewal efforts that relocated vulnerable communities farther from opportunities for employment. The suffering was often unbearable. With rising food prices, many were malnourished. With high energy prices, many suffered from winter cold and summer heat. Overcrowded housing increased the risk of epidemics, particularly as tropical diseases spread into the U.S. due to global climate disruption. Many more were homeless or lived in severely inadequate housing. As parts of the economy began to recover in the 2020s, high unemployment and rising energy costs continued to devastate low-income people and push marginal people out of the middle class. The well-to-do have come to accept high inequity as inevitable. There is little prospect for new government programs to reduce vulnerability. Foundations and nonprofits focus on using their limited resources to achieve the biggest bang for the buck in meeting the basic needs of the poor.